truth is weirder and creepier than fiction.
This is Down the Rabbit Hole, Weird History. I'm Rose Smith.
And I'm Jacob Wesson.
Join us as we explore the unsettling moments when human behavior pushes the boundaries of belief.
Let's dive in.
We think of history as a series of heavy, deliberate stones being stacked one on top of another, but usually it is just a pile of loose gravel waiting for the right vibration. If you look at the San Juan Islands in 1859, you see a geography that was less of a map and more of a Rorschach test. To the British, it was the trailing edge of an empire. To the Americans, it was the leading edge of a destiny. But to the Earth itself, it was just a patch of soil where two different versions of reality were trying to occupy the same physical space.
It feels like one of those things where if everyone had just stayed in bed that morning, the world would look different. You look at the map now and it's so clean. There's a line. But you're saying that back then the line was more like a suggestion?
It wasn't even a suggestion. It was a grammatical error. The Oregon Treaty of 1846 was written by men in rooms with expensive pens who had never smelled the salt air of the Pacific Northwest. They used the phrase, "the channel which separates the continent from Vancouver's Island." The problem is that there are two channels, Haro Strait and Rosario Strait. It's a bit like telling someone to meet you at the big tree in a forest of giants.
Wait, so for 13 years, people were just living there, not knowing what country they were in? That sounds like a recipe for a very specific kind of anxiety. You're building a house, you're planting crops, but you don't actually know who can come and take them away.
It created a psychological vacuum. When humans live in a vacuum, they don't become more peaceful, they become more territorial. You had the Hudson's Bay Company, which was essentially a sovereign nation in the form of a corporation, setting up a sheep ranch on San Juan Island. They weren't just farming, they were marking territory with livestock. Then you had American settlers arriving, thinking they were on American soil because of their own interpretation of that same vague sentence.
Hold on, that doesn't make sense. If I'm a settler and I see a massive British corporation already there with thousands of sheep, why am I picking that specific spot to plant my potatoes?
Because in 1859, the act of planting a potato was a political statement. It was a squatter's right. If you can survive on the land becomes yours. It's a very visceral, muscular way of viewing the world. Lyman Cutler, the American at the center of this, wasn't just a farmer. He was a man who believed that the dirt under his fingernails gave him more authority than a treaty signed in London or D.C. He planted a patch of potatoes right where the Hudson's Bay Company's pigs like to forage.
That feels intentional. You don't put a garden in the middle of a pig run unless you're looking for a fight, or unless you're so convinced of your own rightness that the pig doesn't even exist until it's eating your lunch.
Exactly. We have to look at the pig itself. This wasn't a pet. It was a large, black Berkshire boar. In the mid-19th century, a boar like that was an investment. It was property. It was also an intruder. When Cutler found that pig in his garden on June 15th, he didn't see an animal. He saw the British Empire eating his future. He saw the Hudson's Bay Company's perceived arrogance distilled into a single rooting snout. So he shot it.
He shot a pig over some potatoes in a territory where no one is sure who has the right to even be there. It's so small, Rose. It's absurdly small. How does a dead pig turn into a naval standoff?
It's about the escalation of face. After the shot, Cutler actually went to the British and offered to pay. He offered $7. The British manager, Charles Griffin, demanded $100. That $93 gap is where the war lives. It wasn't about the market value of the pork, it was about the price of submission. Griffin basically told Cutler that if he didn't pay the $100, he'd be arrested and tried in a British court.
And that's the trigger. The moment you mention a British court to an American squatter in 1859, you aren't talking about a fine anymore. You're talking about sovereignty. You're telling him he's a subject, not a citizen.
And Cutler reacts the way people do when they feel cornered by a giant. He calls for help. But he doesn't call a lawyer, he calls the military. And specifically, he gets the attention of General William S. Harney. Now, Harney is a character we need to deconstruct. He was known as the Squaw Killer. He was a hothead, a man who viewed every problem as a nail and himself as a very heavy, very angry hammer. He saw the pig incident not as a local dispute, but as an opportunity to provoke a conflict that might unify a fracturing America.
Wait, you're saying he wanted a war to distract from the stuff happening back east? The tensions that would eventually become the Civil War?
It's a classic move. Externalize the internal rot. Harney sends Captain Pickett, the same Pickett of Pickett's Charge fame, with 66 soldiers to San Juan Island. Their orders weren't to investigate a crime. Their orders were to protect American property and, essentially, to dare the British to do something about it.
66 guys against the British Navy. That's not a defense, that's a dare. It's like standing on someone's toe and waiting for them to shove you so you can justify swinging.
It's a performance. Pickett lands and posts a notice saying all this land belongs to the United States. Meanwhile, the British governor, James Douglas, is watching this from Victoria. He doesn't see 66 soldiers. He sees an illegal invasion of British territory. He responds by sending the HMS Satellite, a 21-gun corvette. Now the scale has shifted from a garden to a broadside.
This is where it gets unsettling for me. We've gone from a pig in a potato patch to a warship with 21 guns in what, a week? The speed of it suggests that the peace was always a lie. It suggests everyone was just waiting for a reason to stop being polite.
It's the fragility of the vibe you mentioned earlier. The 19th century was obsessed with honor, but honor is just a high-status word for insecurity. If I don't react to your 66 men with my 21 guns, I am weak. If I am weak, I lose my colonies. If I lose my colonies, the sun starts to set. The British weren't defending a pig. They were defending the idea of themselves.
And Pickett? What was he doing while these massive ships were pulling into the bay? Was he realizing he'd messed up, or was he doubling down?
He was doubling down. Pickett reportedly said they would make it a Bunker Hill of it. He was leaning into the mythology. He wanted the martyrdom. By the end of July, there were 3 British warships in the harbor, with over 60 guns and 1,000 men. Pickett was outnumbered 20-1, but he knew something crucial. The British captains didn't want to be the ones to start a global war over a pig.
So it's a game of chicken where the guys with the most power are the ones most afraid to use it, and the guy with no power is the one trying to force their hand.
It is the glitch in the system. The lower the rank, the higher the volatility. We have this image of generals and governors being the ones who start wars, but in the pig war, it was the farmer and the captain. The people at the top were actually the ones desperately trying to find the brakes on a vehicle that was already careening down a hill. We'll be right back with part 2.
Now would be a good time to hit those like and follow buttons as well as leave a comment.
We need your help to continue bringing you stories like this one.
Now, let's get back to part 2.
By August of 1859, the silence on San Juan Island must have been deafening. You have nearly 500 American soldiers now dug into earthworks and 5 British warships sitting in the harbor with enough firepower to level the entire island in 20 minutes. And yet, for weeks, nothing happens. They just stare at each other.
That's the part that feels like a fever dream. You have thousands of men with loaded weapons, and everyone is just waiting. Does someone eventually blink, or does the absurdity just become the new normal?
It becomes a theater of manners. The British Rear Admiral, Robert Baines, arrives, and he is the unsung hero of this madness. His governor, Douglas, is screaming at him to land the Marines and clear the Americans off the island. Douglas wants a fight, but Baines looks at the situation and utters one of the most sensible sentences in military history. He says that he will not involve 2 great nations in a war over a squabble about a pig.
Finally, an adult enters the room. But how do you tell a governor no when he's your boss? How do you de-escalate when the honor of the empire is on the line?
You use the bureaucracy. You move slowly. Baines realizes that if he doesn't fire, Pickett can't fire. It's a stalemate of restraint. The soldiers on the ground started to realize it too. We have accounts of the British and American soldiers visiting each other's camps. They were trading tobacco, drinking together, and even holding athletic competitions. They were deconstructing the war from the bottom up, while the politicians were still trying to figure out how to save face at the top.
That is so human. I'm supposed to kill you, but you have better whiskey, and honestly, I don't even know whose pig it was. But the tension doesn't just go away, right? Washington and London eventually find out that their forces are about to blow each other up.
Word finally reaches President James Buchanan. Now, Buchanan is usually remembered for being indecisive as the U.S. drifted towards civil war, but here he moved with surprising grace. He sent General Winfield Scott, the great old man of the Army. Scott had to travel all the way around South America to get there. By the time he arrived, the crisis had been simmering for months.
Imagine that boat ride. Months of wondering if you're sailing into the start of World War Zero.
When Scott arrives, he does something brilliant. He doesn't choose a side. He proposes a joint occupation. He suggests that both sides keep a small force on the island, 100 men each, until a formal treaty can be worked out. He turns the island into a shared apartment. The British move to the north end, the Americans stay on the south end, and they agree to just wait.
For how long?
12 years.
12 years? They lived together on a tiny island in a state of almost war for over a decade? That's not a standoff, that's a long-term relationship.
It was a very polite, very strange era. They built English camp and American camp. The officers would throw dinner parties for each other. They celebrated the 4th of July and the Queen's birthday together. They even shared a common jail. If a soldier got too drunk and rowdy, it didn't matter what uniform he wore. He went to the same cell. The enemy became the only other people who understood the boredom of being stuck on that island.
So the pig died, the armies moved in, everyone got ready to die, and then they ended up becoming roommates. Where is the unsettling part? Because right now it sounds almost hopeful.
The unsettling part is the why. Why did it take 12 years? Because the two nations were so busy with their own internal collapses, the U.S. with the Civil War, Britain with its colonial expansions elsewhere, that they forgot the island existed. The peace wasn't built on mutual respect, it was built on neglect. We like to think peace is a proactive choice, but often it's just that the people in charge are too busy killing other people to focus on you.
That's a dark thought. We only survived the pig war because we were too busy with the Civil War. One horror canceled out another.
And then look at how it ended. In 1871, they finally decided to let a third party settle it. They chose Kaiser Wilhelm I of Germany. He put it to a commission of experts. They looked at the maps, they read the vague treaty from 1846, and they decided the Americans were right about the channel. The Harrow Strait was the boundary. The Americans got the island. And the British? Did they just pack up their tea sets and leave? They did. On November 25, 1872, the Royal Marines hauled down the Union Jack. There was a formal ceremony. The Americans played God Save the Queen, and the British played Yankee Doodle. It was the most dignified exit imaginable for a conflict that started with a dead pig in a garden.
But what about the pig? And Cutler, the guy who pulled the trigger? Does he get a statue, or is he just the guy who almost broke the world?
Lyman Cutler died in relative obscurity. He never got his $100, and he never became a hero. The pig remains the only casualty of the war, but the psychological legacy is what lingers. The San Juan Islands are now a national historical park. It's the only place in the United States where a foreign flag, the Union Jack, is regularly raised and lowered by U.S. park rangers as a sign of respect.
That's a monument to a glitch. A place where we commemorate the fact that, for once, the hotheads didn't win.
But it's also a warning. The pig war tells us that the structures we think are solid, borders, treaties, international law, are actually incredibly porous. They rely entirely on the temperament of the person standing on the ground with the gun. If Admiral Baines had been as angry as General Harney, or if Captain Pickett had been a little more panicked, we'd be talking about the War of 1859 and the thousands of lives lost in a naval battle for the Pacific.
It makes you look at every modern border dispute and wonder where the pig is. What's the tiny, absurd thing today that's keeping two nuclear powers from the edge?
That is the forensic takeaway. We aren't governed by laws. We are governed by the restraint of individuals. The pig war wasn't a joke. It was a near miss. It was a moment where the machinery of war was fully fueled and the engine was turning over, but someone decided not to put it in gear. We have to ask ourselves, in a world that's getting louder and more reactive, do we still have the capacity for that kind of silence?
I hope so, because I don't think we have enough potatoes to feed all the pigs that are rooting around the borders these days.
The pig died so that we could see the absurdity of the system. The question is whether we actually learned the lesson, or if we're just waiting for the next garden to be trampled. History doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme, and usually the rhyme is a punchline that isn't very funny.
On that note, I think I'm going to go check on my fence.
Good luck, Jacob, and keep an eye on the neighbors. Here's what we know. The line between a neighbor and an enemy is often just a matter of perspective and sometimes a single bullet. Thank you for joining us in the rabbit hole today.
If you've got a story that defies explanation or just want to tell us how much this episode affected you, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, as well as Spotify and YouTube.
Down the Rabbit Hole Weird History is brought to you by GX Works.
We'll be back next time with another deep dive into the parts of history most people would rather forget.
Until then, keep questioning what you know. Here is what we do know. The truth is always waiting just below the surface.
Be sure to like, share, follow, subscribe, and all that stuff to hear more episodes. Leave a comment to let us know what you thought and what you'd like to hear in the future. And we'll see you in the hole.